What They Don't Tell You brings you real conversations about wealth management that real people have behind closed doors. We bring together clients and experts to talk about topics that go beyond the numbers. In this two-part episode, business owner Terry Tanasiuk discusses the challenges of leading a business amid a pandemic with our CEO, Matt Evans. From seeing their persistence rewarded to the importance of establishing open communication with their teams and clients, they share their experiences, what they've learned, and how they're planning for an uncertain future.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of What They Don't Tell You. My name is Matt Evans. I'm President and CEO of C2B Wealth Management, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Terry Tanasiuk. Terry is President and majority shareholder of Crawford Construction. Terry is also a client of CWB and a longtime client of C2B Wealth Management. So very grateful for Terry joining us today. Crawford Construction was started in 1971, and Terry joined the firm in 1985 as an estimator and a project manager. Terry worked his way up and became a minority shareholder in 1991. 11 years after joining the company, Terry was named president in 1996 and became the company's sole shareholder in 2004. He recently began selling minority shares to employees. Crawford is a mid to large size general contractor with a head office in Edmonton and a branch office in Calgary. The company has completed projects across the country, from British Columbia to Ontario, with most of its activity in Alberta. Crawford employs between 75 and 100 people with a very diverse range of projects, ranging in value from $100,000 renovations to $70 million new buildings. Most of Terry's work is commercial, institutional, and industrial. Terry, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here and excited to be here and share some of my experiences and the company's experiences through these unusual times.
So Terry, today we want to talk about planning for an uncertain future. Certainly a topical subject for us here in 2020. Planning is really at the heart of what we do for clients in our business, and having a clear plan and a strategy is a key success factor for business owners like yourself and leaders in the business community. But as we know, if 2020 has reminded us of anything, it's that the best laid plans can go awry due to factors that are well beyond our control. So as we've thought about this and thinking about 2020 in the past 10 months, you can kind of separate the experience that we've all had into three discrete phases. First, we had the big disruption in the late winter and early spring of 2020, where we had the pandemic hit us, and we had North America and really the whole world go into various stages of lockdown. Then we had, through the middle part of the year, sort of a mid-year adjustment into the summer months. And there was some cautious optimism that came back in, a sense that potentially things could get back to normal relatively soon. And then we've now entered sort of a third phase, and we have some renewed uncertainty as we head into the fall and winter, with the virus seemingly re-accelerating. Lots of questions about the best path forward, both from a public health and from an economic perspective. So I thought it'd be good for us today just to kind of start with a discussion of each of those three phases. And maybe we could talk about that first phase from your perspective. How did it feel for you and your business and your industry coming into what felt at first like a pretty normal year in 2020, and then we had the big disruption?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's certainly been a wild ride this year. We had in winter of 2020, in Canada, we're always a little slower in the winter because of weather, and some projects just get held because of weather. And we were coming out of 2020 in spring. We had a lot of really good work lined up. We were excited for the year, some big projects, and then the pandemic hit. And it was one cancellation after another, and it was a hold, and it was all of a sudden uncertain. And some of them were projects we thought would just go because our mix of work is both private and public. So combined with that, we start going into this. We thought it was going to be a short-term thing. You know, these clients would revisit it in a month or two. Then we started realizing as we went into the summer, this thing's hanging around for a while. When I say this thing, the virus, obviously. So we started to pivot and thought, well, how are we going to keep our staff busy? Because as in construction, we're always closing up projects and starting new ones. So we started to pivot then, and we looked at different work because we thought we've got to look at this more short term. And then I started thinking about it a little more, and I thought, well, we've never been through something like this before. What have we done different, or what can history tell us? So I looked into the 1918 pandemic, and the pattern was a spring outbreak. Summer, it was still going. Winter, it got worse in the second phase. And then by the following summer, it petered out. So we kind of threw our plans into that because that's the only thing we could go on. So we adjusted and pivoted, and we looked for very short-term projects, things just to keep people busy. And of course, there was other impacts in our business, but that's what we've been carrying into the winter now. With, I think, going into next spring, we've got some more optimism, but it's really going to play out on how this pandemic looks in a few months. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where we've been, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, that's, that experience you describe of really needing to really sort of look at how the world had changed around you, and pivot. I mean, that's a word that you used a couple of times there, and I think that's an experience that so many leaders of businesses and folks working out there in the world have experienced a need to do really this year. We can certainly relate to that from our side. We came in to this year with a busy and transformational year lined up. And we had a major acquisition that we announced at the beginning part of March, just as the stock market, which is a big deal for us in our business, was beginning to turn down sharply. And over the next month, as you know, what we saw was one of the sharpest bear markets in history. By the end of March, Canadian stocks were down about 25%. U.S. stocks were down about 20%, including a 15% year-to-date decline for technology stocks. European stocks were down 25 to 30%, and about the same for Asian stocks. And that was just a straight reflection of the change in the outlook for growth in the world, really a change to an expectation that we'd see lower growth going forward. And in Canada, specific sectors had done even worse. Energy stocks in Canada were down over 40% by the end of March. Price of oil, as we all know, was down over 60%. Base metals and lumber prices were much lower. Gold was a bright spot, no pun intended. Growth stocks were doing a little better than value stocks, but the difference there wasn't quite as dramatic as what we'd see later in the year, but it was a dramatic time overall, to say the least. So like you, we had to regroup and take another look at our strategy and figure out kind of new and innovative ways to close the acquisition that we'd announced and reshape our plan for the year. In the end, we persisted and continued more or less as planned. It was the right choice for us. But certainly, what we saw in our own business and what we observed investors doing as they looked at the outlook for companies operating in various sectors in the world was a mix of offense and defense. And adjusting plans, however, was necessary to kind of stay viable and grow. So it's interesting, that story you told about looking back at the pandemic experience from 100 years ago and kind of drawing some, taking a bit of a possible playbook from that experience. And were there specific ways that specific things that you'd say you pivoted into or pivoted away from through that middle part of the year?
Yeah, we found that clients, a lot of institutional work or government work was actually shut down. We had some hospital work, projects were just shut down. So we had to move immediately to demob the sites, make them safe. And then we had, we had one client who has $22 billion a year revenue, and we were in the middle of a project for him. And all of a sudden the money stopped. And I started thinking about it, and they were very impacted by the pandemic. And I made a call to them. We discussed with them many times about what the options were. And I believed, and they never completely told me, but they were in a cash crisis. In other words, all of a sudden they don't know what's coming in and what's going out. So immediately they said, stop everything. But through communication with them, and I think the key word you used was persistent and consistent, we were able to get through it, and they kind of started to settle down, and the money started flowing, and everything turned out good. But I found you had to have communication, and you had to trust what they were believing, and they had to trust what you were saying. So that's the kind of things that we've seen in the industry, and there was a lot of things that came up. We had a project, we had Italian tile coming for, and it was a county office building. We couldn't even find out where the tile was. The factories were closed. The suppliers were closed. We didn't know if it was in the side of a mountain in Italy or in a warehouse in Toronto. So we had to pivot again. And I keep using that word, but we said, well, we're not going to turn over your space unless we get something that's in Edmonton. So those were the kind of things that we took a lot of work. And I found people were good. People understood, accepted, and said, let's buy into it and let's try and work together. Nobody had a hidden agenda. It's just, let's try and get together. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. You just got a consistent message.
Yeah. So, one of the things that jumped out to me when you were talking there was how important communication is. And this was an experience, this has been an experience this year that has affected everybody. So no one's been spared from this. And if you think about, traditional industries and the supply chains that affect traditional industries, whichever part of the economy that you're looking in, supply chains have been severely disrupted by all of this. And so in order to deliver, the service or product that you've got at the end of your supply chain that customers are paying you for, you've had to stay pretty nimble, think on your feet, stay in touch with people all along that supply chain, right? So that theme of communication, I think, has been very important in 2020. I think where you've seen, certainly this has been an experience that's created winners in specific industries, and it's challenged other industries more severely. But I think what you've observed, what's been observable, at least through that middle part of the year, as companies adjusted and sort of tried to find their footing, was the most successful pivots were companies that were able to really stay in step with every kind of part of their supply chain and really understand where the pressure was, solve for that pressure, and then kind of go to put out the next fire, so to speak.
Well, and that's what we've seen. Like, it was things like handheld faucets, the motion sensor faucets. You couldn't get them suddenly. They weren't available. So again, you had to go, what else can we do here temporarily in a facility that we were turning over? We also looked at the sectors, and there was some things we knew that weren't going to happen, like, for instance, hospital work or educational work. A lot of that was getting shut down. We do a lot of First Nations work, and they actually started to have controls over their sites, who could come in and out, because they wanted to control the virus. So a lot of those things were constantly evolving and changing, and what the rules were. So that's the challenges that we had. And then, so we started looking at different sectors, because we knew in the industrial sector, things were going to be quiet. A lot of private industry didn't want to spend, but we looked at things like nursing homes and senior centers. There was a lot of activity in there because that was a steady workload and it was government funded. So we kind of pivoted to a lot of that. And a lot of people and companies that we looked at were small projects. Somebody was willing to spend a few $100,000 on a little rental that he's been waiting on, but he decided he's not going to do his major new expansion. So that's where we went. We looked at different sectors and thought, what angle and what industry do we attack? And it was successful for us. We've been able to keep our people reasonably busy.
No, that's a great story. I mean, what I hear there from your story is creativity, in addition to, communication that we talked about, staying in step with the changes in your industry and the changes in the outlook for different parts of your operating environment. Just being creative, right? Like, you've got things that, if you had a continuing project and items to complete in that project plan, you might have had to find a new or different way of solving for that requirement in the project plan, because something simply wasn't available anymore at the time.
For sure.
So just creativity, I think, has been a real winning theme in 2020 as well. And so we kind of experienced in our side a similar set of factors at play. The certainly securities markets had a recovery through that middle part of the year with really unprecedented monetary and fiscal stimulus coming into the mix. So your central banks, your governments, you globally getting creative as well, and pulling some tools out of the toolkit that were innovated on the monetary side in the financial crisis, circa kind of 2008-9, and then bringing some fiscal tools to bear in terms of government support programs that were brand new. And so that sort of creativity on fiscal and monetary policy created a bit of a tailwind, pulled markets out of depths that we'd seen at the end of March. And, through April, May, and June, we had a pretty significant recovery and a pretty sharp bounce back in markets. So, in that period of time, Canadian and U.S. stocks were up over 20%. The technology-heavy NASDAQ index was up over 35%. And we've seen, a whole bunch of technology stocks really perform extremely well this year. And that, again, is a reflection of the perceived change in outlook for different companies in different industries. And
I don't think everything's all rosy, but I think, we see lots of issues still with a lot of businesses and industries. But I think we're very optimistic in the future, and it kind of ties into what you're saying. I think through this pandemic, you realize how durable we are economically and how durable we are as a people and humanity. That, whatever it throws at us, there's an impact. But then if you keep a consistent, persistent message and attitude, it seems to bounce back. And it's like now we're starting to get a little more busier. People have kind of come to the understanding. We're getting more calls. I'm thinking of doing this. I might expand. So we're seeing some real optimism. But in the meantime, there's still some pessimism.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think that it does feel like it's not what you'd normally think of as a balanced environment, but there is that sense of optimism that, and hopefulness that we are going to achieve some sort of resumed normalcy in life, but at the same time, not totally sure what that's going to look like. Right. And resilience has been resilience is something you talked about. That's been a major theme. People have adapted. Like what did people do when we went into lockdown? They said, well, I'm going to do some home improvements. So the sales of paint is up 40%, and home improvement stores have thrived.
We've seen it with lumber supply. It's gone through the roof with people doing home projects. That's part of it.
It's a big part of it. And like if you were trying to build a fence this summer, you might have found yourself going to a few different stores to try to get the materials that you needed, because that stuff was so much in demand. Home fitness, another huge theme this year. Home fitness equipment, very difficult to find. Look at a company like Peloton, which is sort of the home cycle class company. That company at the start of the year had an $8 billion market cap. Last week it was $38 billion. So it just shows you sort of the difference in change in fortune for companies in different spaces and how people have adapted through this experience. It really has been extraordinary.
Well, then I realized if you have that team culture, that people really do look after each other, and they did. And it wasn't management telling them to. They threw up their hand. But then if you keep a consistent, persistent message and attitude, it seems to bounce back.
What is it that you think they don't tell you about planning for an uncertain future?
Part 2 of this conversation lands December 30th.